The knife was already at Isabella Romano's throat when Jake Matthews rounded the corner of the Miami parking garage. 3 men had cornered her between a Mercedes and the concrete wall, and the message they were delivering wasn't about money, it was about power. Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed the tire iron from his truck and charged. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Earlier that Tuesday evening, Jake had been just another exhausted single father, leaving his second job at the downtown tech firm. His day had started at 5 a.m. with his 8-year-old daughter Emma's breakfast, continued through his morning shift at the construction site, and was supposed to end quietly after his evening coding work. The last thing on his mind was playing hero in a parking garage, but sometimes life doesn't ask for your schedule. "Hey!" Jake shouted, swinging the tire iron in a wide arc. The first attacker spun around, releasing Isabella's arm. In the dim fluorescent lighting, Jake could see the fear in her dark eyes, but also something else, a calculating intelligence that suggested this wasn't her first dangerous situation. The 3 men were clearly professionals. They moved with coordinated precision, dressed in dark clothing that screamed money and menace. The one holding the knife, a stocky man with gold teeth, smiled with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. "Walk away, friend," Gold Teeth said in accented English. "This doesn't concern you." Jake had exactly 3 thoughts in rapid succession. Emma was waiting for him at home. These weren't random muggers, and the woman they were threatening was someone important enough to warrant this level of intimidation. His Marine Corps training from 8 years ago kicked in automatically. Assess, adapt, act. "Seems like it concerns me now," Jake replied, his construction worker instincts combining with military muscle memory. Years of manual labor had maintained the physical conditioning from his service, and a tire iron wasn't much different from the improvised weapons he'd trained with in Afghanistan. The fight was brief but brutal. Gold Teeth lunged with the knife while his partners flanked from both sides. Jake caught the first one with an elbow to the solar plexus, spun to block the knife with the tire iron, and used his momentum to drive his shoulder into the third attacker's ribs. The sound of cracking bone echoed through the garage. Isabella wasn't just standing there watching. The moment Jake created an opening, she grabbed her purse, which apparently weighed more than most women's accessories should, and slammed it into Gold Teeth's temple. Whatever was inside made a very solid impact. "Behind me," Jake commanded, positioning himself between her and the remaining attackers. The authority in his voice surprised even him. This wasn't the same man who spent his mornings pouring concrete and his evenings debugging code. This was the Marine sergeant who'd led men through combat zones. The attackers regrouped quickly, but something had changed. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by professional assessment. These weren't desperate criminals. They were sent by someone, and they were recalculating whether completing their mission was worth fighting a trained combatant. "Tell your father," Gold Teeth said to Isabella, dabbing blood from his split lip, "that Victor Castellanos sends his regards. Tell him the offer won't stay open forever." He looked directly at Jake, studying his stance and the efficient way he'd handled the fight. "And tell him that Mr. Castellanos would like to speak with his new friend here." With that, they melted back into the shadows of the parking garage, leaving Jake and Isabella alone under the flickering lights. The entire encounter had lasted maybe 90 seconds, but Jake's heart was pounding like he'd run a marathon. "Are you hurt?" he asked, turning to face her properly for the first time. Isabella Romano was beautiful in the way that made men forget their own names, but it wasn't just her appearance that caught Jake's attention. She carried herself with a poise that suggested expensive education and even more expensive protection. Her clothing was designer but practical, her manicure perfect but not impractical, and her eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who understood exactly how dangerous the world could be. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice carried a slight tremor. "Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't." She paused, studying him with new interest. "You're military, or were?" "Marine Corps, long time ago." Jake was surprised she'd picked up on it. "Not that long ago, judging by your reaction time." Isabella pulled out her phone, not to call 911 but to send a text message. "My father will want to thank you personally, and Victor Castellanos will want to meet you for entirely different reasons." Jake felt puzzle pieces clicking into place. Romano, Victor Castellanos, the professional quality of the attackers, the fact that they'd delivered a message rather than simply robbing her, and their obvious interest in him specifically. "Are you Isabella Romano?" he asked. Her pause lasted a heartbeat too long. "Yes." Jake realized he was standing in a parking garage with the daughter of one of Miami's most powerful crime families, and he'd just made himself part of whatever conflict was brewing, in a way that had caught the attention of both sides. "We should call the police," he said, knowing even as he said it that she wouldn't agree. "No." Her response was immediate and firm. "No police. Those men were serious. They'll be back." Isabella studied him with those intelligent, dark eyes, and Jake had the uncomfortable feeling he was being evaluated for something much more significant than his good Samaritan instincts. "What's your name?" she asked. "Jake Matthews." "Do you have children, Jake Matthews?" The question was unexpected, but not random. Everything about Isabella Romano seemed calculated, even her gratitude. "A daughter, 8 years old. Then you understand protection." Her phone buzzed with an immediate response. "My father will want to thank you personally." Jake's blood went cold. Meeting the father meant meeting Vincent Romano, and everyone in Miami knew that name even if they pretended not to. Construction workers heard things on job sites. Tech workers processed payment systems that couldn't bear too much scrutiny. Jake lived in both worlds, and neither prepared him for this conversation. "That's not necessary," he said quickly. "Yes, it is." Isabella's expression grew serious. "Jake, those men weren't just delivering a message to my father. They were evaluating potential assets. The way you fought your training, Victor Castellanos is always looking for people with your skills." The sound of approaching engines echoed through the parking garage, not one car but several. Jake realized his quiet Tuesday evening was about to become something much more complicated. "What if I don't want to be an asset to anyone?" he asked. Isabella smiled, and for the first time since he'd rescued her, she looked genuinely amused. "Then you probably shouldn't have impressed the most dangerous man in Miami with your combat skills." As black SUVs with tinted windows began filling the parking garage, Jake Matthews understood that his life had just taken a turn into territory he'd never navigated before, and judging by the way Isabella was watching him, not just with gratitude, but with the calculating assessment of someone who understood the value of trained soldiers, both crime families were about to make him offers he might not be able to refuse. Vincent Romano didn't look like a crime boss. He looked like a successful businessman who happened to own half of Miami's waterfront, which Jake was beginning to understand might not be far from the truth. They sat in Romano's private office on the 40th floor of a downtown high-rise. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the bay that probably cost more than Jake's annual salary. "Mr. Matthews," Romano said, pouring coffee from a service that definitely hadn't come from Target, "my daughter tells me you're a man of action with military training." Jake accepted the coffee and tried not to think about how many federal investigations had probably tried to place recording devices in this room. "I did what anyone would do." "No." Romano's voice carried absolute certainty. "Anyone would have called the police and waited. You grabbed a weapon and charged 3 armed men to protect a stranger. That's not anyone, Mr. Matthews. That's a Marine." The older man was probably 60, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. His handshake had been firm but not aggressive, his demeanor professional but not cold. If Jake had met him in any other context, he would have assumed Romano was a corporate executive or maybe a high-end attorney. "Isabella says you have a daughter," Romano continued. "Emma. She's 8. And her mother." Jake's jaw tightened slightly. "Not in the picture." Romano nodded without judgment. "Single fathers face unique challenges. I raised Isabella alone after my wife died. It shapes a man's priorities." "Mr. Romano," Jake said carefully, "I appreciate the gratitude, but I need to get home. Emma's with a babysitter and, of course. But first I want to offer you something." Romano reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a business card. "I had you investigated while you were driving here. Former Marine, 2 tours in Afghanistan, honorable discharge, exemplary service record. Construction supervisor with security clearance for government projects. Self-taught programmer working with financial systems." Jake felt a chill at how quickly Romano had assembled his background. "You work fast." "I have to. The attack on Isabella wasn't random, and neither was the attention those men paid to your capabilities." Romano leaned back in his chair. "I need someone with your specific combination of skills. Military training, construction experience, and technical expertise. Someone who understands both physical and digital security." The card was heavy stock, elegant typography. Romano Enterprises, Security Consulting Division. Below that, a phone number and email address. I don't understand, Jake said, though he was beginning to. You work construction and code on the side. 2 jobs to support your daughter, which tells me you're responsible and hard-working, but it also tells me you're undervalued. Romano stood, moving to the window. I have legitimate business interests that require sophisticated security infrastructure, the kind of work that would allow you to support your daughter properly while using all of your skills. Jake studied the card. The offer was too convenient, too perfectly timed. What kind of consulting? Security systems integration. My companies require sophisticated digital infrastructure, and many of my business partners need advice on both physical and cybersecurity upgrades. Romano's smile was slight but genuine. Everything legal, Mr. Matthews. I have lawyers who ensure that. And if I say no, then you say no. The debt remains between us, but your life continues as it was. Romano turned back to face him. However, I suspect your current arrangement isn't sustainable. 2 jobs, 8-year-old daughter. Medical bills from last year when she broke her arm. Jake's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. How do you know about medical bills? I make it my business to understand people before I trust them. And Mr. Matthews, I need to trust you completely, because Victor Castellanos is going to make you an offer too. Romano's expression grew serious. The difference is, I'm offering you legitimate work with legitimate protection for your family. He'll offer you more money to help him destroy everything I've built. Jake felt the pieces clicking together. This isn't just about gratitude. Gratitude brought you to my attention. Your military background makes you valuable. Your moral code makes you trustworthy. Romano returned to his seat. Victor Castellanos has been systematically targeting my operations for months. Last night wasn't just intimidation, it was recruitment. He wanted to see what kind of man would risk himself for a stranger. And now? Now he knows you're a trained Marine with practical intelligence and protective instincts. Exactly the kind of asset he needs. Romano pulled out another card, this one with an address, which is why I'm making my offer first and why I'm including immediate protection for Emma. The second card carried the address of what Jake assumed was an upscale restaurant. Below the address, handwritten in elegant script, tomorrow 7 p.m. IR. Isabella wants to thank you personally, away from business complications, Romano added. She doesn't normally socialize outside our circle, but she insisted. She's quite impressed by your combination of courage and competence. Jake felt the walls of his simple life reshaping around him. Emma needed stability, needed health care, needed a father who could provide for her future. But accepting Romano's offer meant entering a world where parking garage attacks were business communications and dinner invitations carried implications beyond politeness. I need to think about it, Jake said finally. Of course, but Mr. Matthews. Romano's tone carried gentle warning. Victor Castellanos saw you in that parking garage. His men reported back. Whether you accept my offer or not, you're now part of this situation. The question is whether you'll be part of it with my protection or without it. Jake pocketed both business cards and stood to leave. As he reached the door, Romano spoke again. Isabella told me something else about tonight. She said you didn't hesitate. Not for a second. Most men would have calculated the risks, considered the consequences. You saw someone in danger and acted immediately. Romano's voice carried what might have been approval. That's either very brave or very stupid. Sometimes there isn't a difference, Jake replied. Romano's laugh was genuine and surprised. Now I understand why my daughter insisted on dinner. As Jake left the building and walked back to his truck, he realized that saving Isabella Romano's life had saved his own in ways he was just beginning to understand. The question was whether he was brave enough, or stupid enough, to see where it led. His phone buzzed again. Emma wondering about pancakes. Jake looked at the business cards in his hand and made a decision that would change everything. He texted back, "How about we go grocery shopping tomorrow? Daddy might have some good news." Jake spent most of Wednesday questioning his sanity. He'd called Romano Enterprises that morning and accepted the consulting position, effective immediately. By noon, he'd given notice at both jobs, something that should have terrified him but instead felt like finally breathing, after holding his breath for months. The restaurant Isabella had chosen was the kind of place where Jake would normally need a reservation 3 weeks in advance, and a credit card he definitely didn't own. Bianco Mari sat on Miami Beach with a view of the sunset that probably cost extra, and when Jake arrived at 7 p.m. he felt distinctly underdressed, despite his best efforts. Isabella was already seated at a corner table, wearing a dress that managed to be both elegant and approachable. She stood when she saw him, and Jake realized she was nervous too, a detail that somehow made the entire situation feel more real and less like he'd stumbled into someone else's life. "You came," she said, and there was genuine relief in her voice. "You thought I wouldn't? I thought you might have spent the day reconsidering your involvement with my family." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Most people do." Jake sat down and immediately understood why this table had been chosen. It offered clear sightlines to every entrance, positioned them with their backs to a wall, and somehow managed to feel private despite being in a public space. Everything about Isabella Romano's life was calculated for safety, a necessity she'd learned to live with as both a business executive and a crime boss's daughter. "Your father offered me a job," Jake said without preamble. "I know, he told me." Isabella's smile was slight but genuine. "He also told me you accepted. Are you surprised?" "Honestly, yes." She sipped her wine, something that probably cost more than Jake's monthly electric bill. Most people hear the name Romano and develop sudden conflicts of interest. Jake studied her across the candlelit table. In the soft lighting, with her guard partially down, Isabella looked younger than he'd initially estimated. Maybe 26, maybe 28. Young enough to have choices about her life, but old enough to understand why those choices were limited by the dangerous world she'd inherited. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said. "Of course." "Last night, you knew those men were coming, didn't you?" Isabella's pause confirmed his suspicion. "Not specifically, but I knew something was coming. Victor Castellanos has been escalating his pressure campaign for months, threatening suppliers, intimidating business partners, making it clear that working with my father comes with consequences." "So why were you alone in that parking garage?" "Because I refused to live my entire life in a cage." Her answer carried frustrated determination. "I have an MBA from Wharton. I speak 4 languages. I run the legitimate operations of a billion-dollar enterprise, and I'm 30 years old. But I also grew up learning tactical awareness, self-defense, and crisis management, because those skills keep you alive in my world." Jake felt pieces of the puzzle clicking together. "You were testing your own security protocols, seeing if you could handle yourself, and learning that competence isn't always enough." Isabella's laugh held no humor. 15 minutes of independence, and I nearly got myself killed. If you hadn't been there, but I was there." "Yes, you were." She met his eyes across the table. "Why?" It was Jake's turn to hesitate. The honest answer was complicated, involving Emma's medical bills and his own frustration with constantly struggling to provide for his daughter. But there was something else, something he wasn't ready to examine too closely. "I have a daughter," he said finally. "Someone threatens a woman, and I see Emma 15 years from now hoping someone would help her." Isabella's expression softened. "Tell me about her." For the next hour, Jake found himself doing something he rarely did, talking about Emma with someone who actually listened. Most people asked about his daughter out of politeness, but Isabella was genuinely curious. She wanted to know about Emma's school, her friends, her dreams of becoming a marine biologist, despite having never seen the ocean. "She's never seen the ocean?" Isabella asked, incredulous. "You live in Miami." "We live in Homestead," Jake corrected. 25 miles away might as well be another planet when you're working 2 jobs and can't afford parking fees." "That's ridiculous. That's reality for most people." Isabella looked genuinely thoughtful. "I forget sometimes. I've been wealthy my entire life, and wealthy people don't think about parking fees. But I also grew up understanding that wealth attracts danger, which is why I know how to handle myself in situations most executives never face." The admission was refreshingly honest, and Jake found himself relaxing despite his better judgment. Isabella Romano was nothing like what he'd expected from a crime boss's daughter. She was intelligent without being condescending, curious without being intrusive, and surprisingly practical for someone who probably had trust funds larger than most people's mortgages. "Can I ask you something now?" Isabella said as their dinner arrived. "Fair's fair. Are you afraid of me, of my family?" Jake considered the question seriously. "I should be. Everything logical says I should take Emma and move to another state. But you're not going to." "No, I'm not going to." "Why?" This was the question Jake had been asking himself all day. The practical answer was money and security. The emotional answer was more complicated. "Because for the first time in 3 years I have options," he said finally. "And because your father was right. What happened last night made me part of this whether I wanted to be or not. At least this way, I have some control over how it plays out." Isabella nodded approvingly. "You're more practical than I expected. More practical than what you expected? More practical than romantic." Her smile carried mischief. "Most men who rescue women in parking garages are looking for something more dramatic in return." Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I wasn't looking for anything in return." "I know. That's what makes you interesting." The conversation shifted to safer topics: books, movies, Emma's fascination with dolphins, but Jake was increasingly aware of the undercurrent of attraction building between them. Isabella was beautiful, intelligent, and surprisingly easy to talk to. She was also Vincent Romano's daughter, which meant she existed in a world where relationships came with complications he was only beginning to understand. When dinner ended, Isabella insisted on walking him to his truck. The evening was warm, typical for October in Miami, and the beach was alive with tourists and locals taking advantage of the perfect weather. "Jake," Isabella said as they reached his Ford F-150. The contrast between his work truck and her world couldn't have been more obvious, but she didn't seem to notice. "I want you to know that what happened last night, it wasn't just about my father's gratitude." "What do you mean?" "I mean I haven't been able to stop thinking about it." "About you." She stepped closer, and Jake caught that same expensive perfume from the night before. "About how you didn't hesitate, how you just acted." "Isabella, I know this is complicated. I know my life comes with dangers and difficulties that aren't fair to you or Emma." Her dark eyes were serious now. "But I also know that I've never met anyone like you." Jake felt the pull of attraction, the desire to lean down and kiss her, to see where this impossible situation might lead. But he also felt the weight of responsibility, to Emma, to his own judgment, to the fragile stability he was trying to build. "We barely know each other," he said softly. "Then maybe we should change that." Before Jake could respond, Isabella's phone buzzed with an urgent text. Her expression changed immediately, shifting from personal to professional in an instant, the same way it had the night before when business demanded her attention. "I have to go," she said, already stepping back toward the restaurant's valet area. "There's a situation that requires my attention." "Everything okay?" "Business complications." She paused, looking back at him. "Jake, tomorrow you start working for my father. Tonight was just dinner between two people who find each other interesting. Remember that distinction." As she disappeared into a black sedan that materialized with suspicious efficiency, Jake realized he was in deeper than he'd thought. Isabella Romano wasn't just beautiful and intelligent, she was a woman who balanced corporate leadership with the tactical awareness required to survive in her family's world. His phone rang as he drove home. Unknown number. "Mr. Matthews," a voice he recognized as Vincent Romano said. "I trust dinner was pleasant?" "Mr. Romano, excellent. I'm calling because we've received intelligence that Victor Castellanos is planning something more aggressive than parking garage intimidation. I'd like you to start your consulting work immediately." "Tonight?" "Tonight. My driver will collect you in 1 hour. Bring work clothes. We're inspecting security upgrades at one of my warehouses." Romano's tone became serious. "And Mr. Matthews, this isn't a test, this is the real thing. After tonight, there's no going back to your old life." As Jake hung up and drove toward home to arrange emergency babysitting for Emma, he realized that dinner with Isabella had been more than attraction and conversation. It had been his last moment of innocence before entering Vincent Romano's world completely. Whatever was waiting for him at that warehouse would change everything. Again, the warehouse district at midnight felt like another planet. Jake followed Vincent Romano and his security team through a maze of shipping containers and industrial equipment, trying to understand how his life had gone from debugging code to conducting what Romano called operational assessments in less than 48 hours. "The weakness is here," Romano said, pointing to a section of the building's perimeter. "Castellanos' people have been probing our security for weeks. Tonight, we believe they'll make their move." Jake studied the setup with both his construction and coding backgrounds active, his marine training automatically assessing defensive positions and vulnerability points. The warehouse was a sophisticated operation, not just storage, but a full logistics hub with digital tracking systems, automated inventory management, and security protocols that would impress most tech companies. "What exactly are we protecting?" Jake asked. "Legitimate imports," Romano replied smoothly. "Art, wine, textiles, but the real value is in the information. This facility processes shipping data for 12 different business partners, client lists, delivery schedules, financial transactions, everything Castellanos needs to systematically destroy my operations. Jake nodded, understanding the strategy. This wasn't about stealing money or goods. It was about access to information that could unravel an entire network. The security system integration you mentioned, Jake said, pieces clicking together. You need someone who understands both the physical and digital vulnerabilities. Exactly. And someone smart enough to think like an attacker. Romano's approval was evident. Tell me, if you were Castellanos, how would you approach this? Jake spent the next 20 minutes analyzing the facility with fresh eyes, his military experience combining with technical knowledge to identify weak points. The physical security was impressive, but predictable. Cameras, motion sensors, armed guards following standard patterns. The digital security was more sophisticated, but had the kind of gaps that suggested it had been upgraded piecemeal over time. I'd go through the loading dock, Jake said finally. Not to break in, but to install monitoring equipment. A small device attached to the network infrastructure could give remote access to everything flowing through this facility. Romano exchanged glances with his head of security, a man named Marcus, who looked like he could bench press Jake's truck. Explain, Romano said. Jake pointed to the loading dock's network junction box. Delivery trucks connect to your tracking system to confirm shipments. If I compromise that connection point, I can monitor all data flowing through it. I don't need to break into your building. I just need to intercept your communications. And how would you prevent that? This was the test, Jake realized. Not just his ability to spot vulnerabilities, but his capacity to provide solutions. Isolated network for the tracking system, air-gapped from your main servers. Encrypted tunnels for any necessary data transfers, with authentication protocols that change daily. Jake warmed to the problem. And physical security for the connection points, tamper-evident housings, redundant monitoring, random inspection schedules. Romano smiled. Marcus? Implement Mr. Matthews' recommendations immediately. As the security team began working, Romano led Jake to a small office overlooking the warehouse floor. The space was functional but comfortable, with windows that provided clear sightlines to all critical areas. Coffee? Romano asked, producing a thermos that smelled significantly better than anything Jake had experienced in his previous jobs. Mr. Romano, Jake said, accepting the coffee, can I ask you something directly? Of course. This operation, these security measures, the level of coordination, this isn't just about importing art and wine, is it? Romano was quiet for a moment, studying Jake over his coffee cup. What do you think it's about? I think you run a legitimate business empire that happens to compete with people who don't limit themselves to legitimate methods. Jake chose his words carefully. I think you've built something valuable, and Victor Castellanos wants to take it away from you. And if some of my methods aren't entirely conventional? Jake had been expecting this question. As long as you're not hurting innocent people, and as long as Emma is safe, I can live with unconventional. Romano nodded approvingly. You're more adaptable than most people. I'm a single father. Adaptability is a survival skill. Their conversation was interrupted by Marcus speaking urgently into his radio. Romano's expression sharpened immediately. Movement on the perimeter, Marcus reported. 3 vehicles approaching from the east. Romano stood, moving to the window. Ahead of schedule. They're either more confident than we expected or they know something we don't. Jake joined him at the window, watching as black SUVs positioned themselves around the facility. The vehicles were too well coordinated to be random, too professional to be amateurs. How many men? Romano asked. 12 minimum, possibly more. Marcus was already coordinating his team's response. They're not trying to hide their presence. Because they don't intend to leave witnesses, Romano said grimly. Marcus, initiate lockdown protocol. Mr. Matthews, I'm afraid your first night is going to be more educational than planned. The warehouse transformed in minutes. Steel shutters rolled down over windows. Additional lighting illuminated the perimeter, and Romano's security team took positions with the efficiency of military professionals. Jake realized he was witnessing something far more sophisticated than private security. This was a prepared defensive operation. Should I call the police? Jake asked. The police response time to this district is 23 minutes, Romano replied matter-of-factly. By then, this will be over one way or another. Besides, Castellanos has people who monitor police communications. We handle this internally. Jake's phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Send out Jake Matthews and no one gets hurt. You have 5 minutes. Romano read the message over Jake's shoulder. They know you're here. Interesting. How is that interesting? Jake demanded. It sounds like a threat. It means this isn't random. They're specifically targeting you. Which means Victor Castellanos sees you as more than just a good Samaritan. Romano's expression was thoughtful. The question is why? Jake felt cold dread settling in his stomach. Emma. They could use her to... Emma is safe, Romano interrupted. I had a security team assigned to her the moment you accepted my job offer. She's at your apartment with a babysitter who is actually a retired police officer, and there are 2 men watching the building. The relief was overwhelming, but Jake realized the implications were staggering. You've been protecting her since yesterday. I protect my people, Mr. Matthews. You became my people the moment you saved Isabella's life. Another text arrived. 3 minutes. Romano's radio crackled with reports from his security team. The attackers were taking positions for a coordinated assault, using military-style tactics that suggested professional training. Mr. Romano, Jake said, if they want me, maybe I should... Absolutely not. Romano's voice cut through the suggestion like a blade. Victor Castellanos doesn't want to negotiate. He wants to eliminate anyone who can threaten his plans. Sending you out there would accomplish nothing except getting you killed. Jake looked around the office, understanding that his presence had escalated what might have been a manageable situation into something far more dangerous. What do you need me to do? He asked. Romano smiled, and for the first time since Jake had met him, the expression was genuinely warm. I need you to do what you did in that parking garage. I need you to see solutions that others miss. As gunfire erupted outside the warehouse, Jake Matthews realized that his new life was going to require skills he'd never imagined developing. But as he watched Vincent Romano coordinate a defense of his empire with calm professionalism, Jake also realized he might have found something he'd been searching for without knowing it, a purpose that went beyond simple survival. The war for Miami was just beginning, and somehow Jake had become one of its key players. By dawn, 3 things had become crystal clear. Victor Castellanos was declaring war, Jake Matthews was no longer a civilian, and Isabella Romano was far more involved in her father's operations than dinner conversation had suggested. She arrived at the warehouse as the last police car was leaving, stepping out of her sedan wearing tactical clothing and carrying herself with the authority of someone accustomed to managing crisis situations. Jake watched her survey the scene, broken glass, bullet holes, and evidence of a firefight that had lasted nearly 2 hours, with the dispassionate professionalism of an executive reviewing quarterly reports. Casualties? She asked Marcus, not bothering with pleasantries. 2 of theirs wounded, none of ours. They withdrew when police sirens got close. Marcus handed her a tablet displaying security footage. But Jake was right about their strategy. They weren't trying to break in, they were installing surveillance equipment. Isabella studied the footage, then turned to Jake. Show me. Jake led her to the loading dock, pointing out the network junction box where Castellanos' people had attempted to attach monitoring devices. They got close, but the new security protocols prevented them from completing the installation. How close? Isabella's question carried the weight of someone who understood that close in this business could mean the difference between survival and destruction. Close enough to map our network topology, Jake admitted. Not close enough to access our data, but they now know how our systems are structured. Isabella nodded, absorbing the implications with the same tactical awareness she'd shown during the parking garage attack. Which means they'll adapt their approach for next time. There's going to be a next time, Jake asked. Victor Castellanos doesn't accept defeat gracefully, Vincent Romano said, joining their conversation. Last night was reconnaissance. The real attack is still coming. Jake looked between father and daughter, noting the easy way they communicated about tactics and security. Whatever Isabella's role in the organization, it wasn't ceremonial. She was clearly an integral part of both the legitimate business operations and the security infrastructure that protected them. We need to discuss strategy, Isabella said to her father. Privately. Romano nodded, then turned to Jake. Mr. Matthews, you've earned some rest. Marcus will drive you home so you can check on Emma. We'll debrief later this afternoon. As Jake climbed into the passenger seat of Marcus's SUV, he caught Isabella watching him through the warehouse office window. Even from a distance, he could see the calculating expression that suggested she was reassessing his value to their operation. The drive through Miami morning traffic gave Jake time to process what had happened. 12 hours ago, he'd been having dinner with an attractive woman. Now he was leaving a crime scene where people had tried to kill him specifically, and somehow that felt like the natural progression of events. "She's impressive, isn't she?" Marcus said, apparently reading Jake's thoughts. "Isabella. Miss Romano. Most people see the daughter of a crime boss and assume she's decorative. They don't realize she has an MBA from Wharton and runs the legitimate side of the business with more efficiency than most Fortune 500 CEOs. They also don't realize she's been trained in tactical operations since she was 16. Jake processed this information. "The legitimate side," Marcus smiled. "Romano Enterprises owns hotels, restaurants, shipping companies, tech firms, and real estate developments worth approximately $2 billion. All completely legal, all extremely profitable. Miss Romano built most of that empire herself while learning to handle situations like last night. And the illegitimate side. That's a conversation for someone with higher clearance than mine." Jake's apartment looked exactly the same as when he'd left it, but somehow felt like it belonged to a different person. Emma was awake, eating breakfast with the babysitter who introduced herself as Detective Sarah Chen, currently on leave from Miami-Dade Police. "Daddy!" Emma launched herself into Jake's arms with the enthusiasm of an 8-year-old who'd been promised pancakes the previous day. "Mrs. Chen taught me how to play poker." Jake looked at Chen, who shrugged apologetically. "She said you were working late, so I taught her the basics. Nothing with real money." "Can we go to the beach today?" Emma asked. "Mrs. Chen says it's only 20 minutes away if we take the highway." Jake felt the weight of his new reality settling around him. Emma's innocent request highlighted everything that was changing about their lives. Yesterday, a trip to the beach had been financially impossible. Today, it was a security consideration. "Let me make some phone calls first," Jake said. "Then we'll see about the beach." After Chen left, Jake called the number Romano had given him for non-emergency communications. Isabella answered on the first ring. "How's Emma?" she asked without preamble. "She's fine. She wants to go to the beach." Jake paused. "Is that safe?" "Not yet. Give us 24 hours to assess Castellanos' response to last night." Isabella's voice carried genuine regret. "I know this is hard. Jake, the restrictions, the constant security considerations, it's not fair to either of you, but it's necessary. For now, yes." Jake looked out his apartment window at the parking lot where this had all started. "Isabella, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Last night at dinner, you talked about feeling trapped by your father's choices. But Marcus says you run most of the legitimate businesses. That doesn't sound like someone who's trapped." Isabella was quiet for a moment. "There's a difference between having responsibility and having freedom, Jake. I can run billion-dollar companies, but I can't go to dinner without a security detail. I can negotiate with foreign governments, but I can't date someone without considering how it affects family operations." The admission carried more vulnerability than Jake had expected. "Is that what this is? Dating someone? I don't know what this is yet, but I know I want to find out, and that's complicated enough to be dangerous for everyone involved." Before Jake could respond, Emma appeared at his elbow, tugging on his shirt. "Daddy, there's a man outside who wants to talk to you." Jake's blood went cold. He moved to the window and saw a figure in an expensive suit standing next to a black sedan. Not threatening, but definitely not belonging to the neighborhood. "Isabella," Jake said into the phone, "someone's here. Stay inside, I'm sending backup. It might be too late for that." The man outside had noticed Jake in the window and was now walking toward the apartment building's entrance. He moved with casual confidence, hands visible, no apparent weapons. Professional, but not immediately threatening. Jake's doorbell rang. "Daddy?" Emma's voice carried worry now. 8-year-olds were sensitive to adult tension, and Jake's stress was probably obvious. "Go to your room and close the door," Jake told her. "Everything's fine, but I need to talk to this man privately." Emma hesitated, then obeyed with the reluctant compliance of a child who understood that sometimes adults needed space to handle grown-up problems. Jake approached the door with his phone still connected to Isabella. "Can you hear what's happening?" "Yes. Don't open the door until my people arrive." But the man outside wasn't waiting for permission. Jake heard the subtle sound of lockpicks working on his apartment door and realized that courtesy visits weren't part of Victor Castellanos' strategy. "Jake Matthews?" The voice carried a slight accent and complete confidence. "My name is Alessandro Fernandez. I represent Mr. Castellanos. He would like to speak with you." "Through my door is fine," Jake replied, positioning himself where he could see Emma's room while watching the entrance. "Mr. Castellanos values face-to-face conversation. He's waiting in the car outside. He was quite impressed by your performance last night." Jake could hear sirens in the distance, either Isabella's people or regular police responding to whatever surveillance systems Romano had protecting his new employee. "Tell Mr. Castellanos that I'm currently employed by Romano Enterprises," Jake said. "Any communication should go through proper business channels." Alessandro's laugh carried genuine amusement. "Mr. Matthews, you've been employed by Mr. Romano for less than 24 hours, but your tactical skills last night suggest you understand the value of exploring your options." The lock clicked open. Jake realized he was about to meet Victor Castellanos, whether he wanted to or not, and Emma was 30 feet away behind a door that wouldn't stop a determined intruder. His new life was about to collide with his old one in ways that could destroy everything he cared about. But as the door swung open and Alessandro stepped into his apartment, Jake also realized something else. He wasn't the same man who'd been struggling to pay medical bills 2 days ago. The man facing Alessandro Fernandez had backup coming, had resources at his disposal, and had allies who understood how to fight this kind of war. The sirens were getting closer, and Jake Matthews was no longer facing this alone. Victor Castellanos wasn't what Jake had expected. He was younger than Vincent Romano, maybe 50, with the kind of polished appearance that suggested expensive education and even more expensive grooming. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to having his requests treated as commands. "Mr. Matthews," Castellanos said, settling into Jake's small living room as if he owned it, "you've caused quite a complication." Jake remained standing, positioned between Castellanos and Emma's room. Alessandro had efficiently swept the apartment and now stood near the window, monitoring the approaching sirens with professional interest. "I'm not sure what I mean," Jake replied. "Of course you do. You're an intelligent man. That much is obvious from your tactical assessment last night." Castellanos gestured around the modest apartment. "This doesn't suit you anymore, does it? Living paycheck to paycheck, worrying about your daughter's future, working multiple jobs just to maintain basic stability." Jake said nothing, but Castellanos wasn't wrong. The contrast between his current life and what Romano was offering had become impossible to ignore. "Vincent Romano is a relic," Castellanos continued. "His methods are outdated, his thinking limited by traditions that no longer serve purpose. But you understand modern warfare, digital systems, tactical coordination, strategic thinking. I watched the warehouse footage, Mr. Matthews. You think like a soldier and adapt like an engineer." "What are you offering?" Jake asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Partnership, real partnership, not employment." Castellanos pulled out a tablet, displaying financial projections that made Jake's breath catch. "I need someone who understands both digital systems and practical implementation, someone who can help me modernize operations that have been constrained by old-world thinking." The numbers on the screen were staggering, not just salary but equity participation, profit sharing, and benefits that would set Emma up for life. "And all I have to do is betray the people who trusted me?" "You would be preventing a war, Mr. Matthews. Romano and I are going to conflict regardless of your involvement. But with your help, that conflict could be resolved quickly, with minimal casualties in favor of the side that represents progress rather than tradition." Jake heard Emma's door open behind him. She emerged cautiously, studying the strangers in their living room with the sharp observation skills of a child who'd learned to read adult moods for survival. "Daddy?" Emma's voice was small but steady. "Are these the people you're working with now?" Castellanos smiled, and Jake realized the man had planned this moment carefully. "You must be Emma. Your father has told me wonderful things about you." "He has?" Emma looked confused. "But Daddy just met you." "Actually, your father and I have been discussing business arrangements for several days." Castellanos lied smoothly. "He's being very careful about what's best for your future." Jake felt anger rising, but kept his voice calm. "Emma, go back to your room. The grown-ups need to finish talking, but I want to hear about Daddy's new job." "Emma," Jake's tone carried enough authority to send her reluctantly back to her room, but not before she'd served Castellanos' purpose, demonstrating that Jake's decisions affected more than just himself. "Beautiful child," Castellanos said once Emma was gone. "Intelligent, observant. She deserves every advantage you can provide." The sirens were closer now, and Alessandro spoke quietly into his radio. Whatever backup was coming would arrive soon, but Jake realized that Castellanos had timed this conversation to conclude before interference arrived. "I need an answer now, Mr. Matthews. Work with me, and your daughter grows up wealthy and protected. Continue working for Romano, and she grows up in the middle of a war that could destroy everything you're trying to build for her." Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. "Help arriving in 90 seconds. Keep them talking." But keeping them talking meant engaging with Castellanos' offer, and some part of Jake was genuinely tempted. The financial security, Emma's future, the chance to be part of building something new rather than defending something old, it all made logical sense. "What happened to Romano's other allies who switched sides?" Jake asked. Castellanos' smile faltered slightly. "Business transitions are rarely comfortable for everyone involved." "That's not an answer, Mr. Matthews. You're asking about ancient history. What matters is current opportunity and your daughter's future security." Jake heard vehicles stopping outside his building. Multiple engines, coordinated arrival, definitely not regular police response. "The opportunity to help you destroy Vincent Romano's empire and take over his operations," Jake said. "The opportunity to modernize Miami's business climate and eliminate unnecessary conflict." Castellanos stood, recognizing that his window for persuasion was closing. "But the offer expires when I leave this room." Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside Jake's apartment. Romano's people had arrived in force. "Mr. Castellanos," Jake said, moving to open the door, "I appreciate the offer, but I've already made my choice. For your daughter's sake, I hope you've chosen wisely." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. As Castellanos and Alessandro moved toward the door, Jake realized that rejecting the offer hadn't ended the danger. It had merely clarified which side he was on in a conflict that was about to escalate dramatically. Vincent Romano entered Jake's apartment, followed by Isabella and 6 men who looked like they specialized in situations requiring decisive action. The contrast between Romano's controlled professionalism and Castellanos' polished menace filled the small space with tension thick enough to cut. "Victor," Romano said calmly, "I wasn't expecting a house call. Vincent, your new employee and I were discussing career opportunities. I trust the conversation was enlightening." Castellanos looked at Jake one final time. "Very enlightening. Mr. Matthews understands the stakes now." As Castellanos and his people departed, Jake felt the weight of his decision settling around him. He'd chosen sides in a war he didn't fully understand, binding his and Emma's future to people whose methods he was still learning to accept. "Are you all right?" Isabella asked, her concern genuine and immediate. "We're fine, but he made it clear that Emma's safety depends on my cooperation." "Emma's safety depends on my family's ability to protect our people," Romano corrected, "which we will do." Emma appeared in her doorway again, studying the assembled adults with frank curiosity. "Daddy, are you a spy now?" Jake looked around the room at Vincent Romano, Isabella, and the security team that had responded to protect his family. He thought about the warehouse firefight, the job offer that had changed everything, and the realization that his old life was gone forever. "Not a spy, baby, but something different than I used to be." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Can we still go to the beach sometime?" Isabella smiled, the expression transforming her face completely. "Emma, how would you like to go to the beach today? I know a private stretch that's very safe, very beautiful, and has dolphins that swim close to shore." "Really?" Emma's excitement was pure and infectious. "Daddy, can we?" Jake looked at Isabella, understanding that she was offering more than just a beach trip. She was offering integration into a life where Emma could have both security and experiences, where his daughter's future could include possibilities he'd never been able to provide. "Yes," Jake said, feeling pieces of his new reality falling into place. "We can go to the beach." As Romano's people secured the apartment and made arrangements for their departure, Jake realized that saving Isabella Romano's life had indeed saved his own. But more than that, it had opened a door to a future where Emma could grow up protected, educated and loved by people who understood that family meant more than blood. The war with Victor Castellanos was just beginning, but for the first time in 3 years, Jake Matthews felt like he was fighting for something worth winning. And judging by the way Isabella was explaining tide pools to Emma, he wasn't fighting alone. 3 months later, Jake stood on the balcony of his new penthouse apartment, company housing, Romano had called it, watching Emma play in the private pool with children from other Romano family members. The view stretched across Biscayne Bay to the Atlantic beyond, and Emma had indeed seen dolphins, just as Isabella had promised. Victor Castellanos had made 3 more attempts to recruit or eliminate Jake, each one less successful than the last. Romano Enterprises had expanded into new markets, with Jake's security innovations protecting operations across 12 states. And Isabella had become not just an ally in business, but something much more personal and permanent. "Daddy," Emma called from the pool, "Isabella says she's going to teach me Italian." Jake waved back, thinking about how much had changed since that night in the parking garage. Emma was thriving, protected and happy in ways that Jake had never imagined possible. He had work that challenged him, resources to provide for his daughter's future, and a woman he loved who understood both his strengths and his limitations. "Regretting your choice?" Isabella asked, joining him on the balcony. "Never," Jake replied, pulling her close. "Best decision I ever made. Even with all the complications." Jake looked down at Emma, then across the bay toward the city, where he'd built a new life from a moment of instinctive courage. "Especially with all the complications." Isabella smiled and kissed him softly. "Then you're ready for the next complication, which is, Vincent wants to make you a full partner, equal stake in Romano Enterprises, complete integration into family operations." She paused, studying his expression. "And I want to know if you're ready to make this permanent in other ways too." Jake understood what she was asking. Partnership with Vincent Romano meant more than business success. It meant complete commitment to a life that would always include danger, complexity, and moral ambiguity. And marriage to Isabella meant accepting that their children would inherit both privilege and risk. He looked at Emma again, laughing with pure joy as she played with children who would be her lifelong friends and protectors. He thought about the alternative, returning to a life of struggling and limitation, where love and security were constrained by financial reality. "Yes," Jake said, meaning it completely. "I'm ready for both." As the sun set over Miami, Jake Matthews realized that sometimes the best decisions were the ones that seemed impossible when you first faced them. He'd saved Isabella Romano's life in a parking garage, but she'd saved his in every way that mattered. And Emma was going to grow up knowing that her father was a man who'd chosen love and loyalty over safety and limitation, in a world where both courage and intelligence were required for survival. It was a good life, complicated, dangerous, and absolutely worth fighting for.